That snow.
Don't talk about it.
I'm not gonna rub it in. I'm not gonna rub it in.
Yeah, right. Yeah, okay. You don't have to take a dog out in the snow right now.
Poor Quincy. I see Quincy all the time. I'm feeling for Quincy out there.
Yeah,
Uh,
Lord Stanley is quite the quite the debonair doggy.
yeah. So let's go ahead and get started. I know we're a little bit late. I know we have some guests that have chimed in, and again, I want to welcome you and welcome everybody that's joining us today to our first of our speakers for 2021. We're super excited to have Dr. Judy Alston from Ashland University joining us today. She's the first of our. We're going to have three speakers this spring, and really around the theme of cultivating critically conscious and culturally competent educational leadership. For us at Trinity, like a lot of people around the country are struggling with, I think Dr. Latson-Billings has called the three pandemics. The pandemic, obviously, of the coronavirus, the pandemic of the struggle for social justice and Black Lives Matter that have been sweeping across the country, and obviously the pandemic of the economic insecurity that a lot of our families, a lot of our students are facing in our schools. And so when I was trying to put together a list of folks that I felt could come and really help us think about these issues in a critical way at this time period of our country's history, Dr. Alston was one of those that I really wanted to bring out. And I wish, like I said, I could bring her onto campus, and hopefully we can do that soon when we come out of this pandemic. I'd like to include or encourage those who are attending to submit your questions, and we'll have some time at the end. I'll go ahead and field those and kind of facilitate that part, but I'm going to turn the time over to Dr. Alston after I introduce her real quick. It's really hard to introduce her because she's done so much in her career. And I know that as a graduate student and as an early career scholar at UCEA, which UCA for a lot of us is the place to go for educational leadership scholars. Dr. Alston's always been one of those that I look forward to seeing every November. Not only the way she dresses and the shoes, I have to see the shoes, but just to be able to run into her, and she's always been a friendly face and just a mentor to me with the scholarship that she's done over her career. As somebody who studies race and equity and really trying to challenge our field, she's one of those leaders that has always been around for us to really look up to and to really kind of push the field in ways that it's needed to be pushed. Dr. Alston is currently a professor and director of the of the EDD in leadership studies at Ashland University in Ohio. In 2010, she became the first Black woman to be promoted to full professor in the history of Ashland University. She earned her Ph.D. in educational administration from the Pennsylvania State University, has several masters, a master's in divinity from Methodist Theological School in Ohio, a master's in education, in educational administration, a master's in education in secondary education, both from the University of South Carolina, which she's, I know, proud, somebody who's come out of South Carolina is very proud of her roots in South Carolina, and a BA in English from Winthrop College. She's an author, very well published across books, book chapters, articles, and the top of our fields in the journals that are top of our fields. Her most recent book, I think, is very timely and it's very needed in our field, called Her Stories, Leading with the Lessons of the Lives of Black Women Activists. She's also published a multi-leadership in urban schools and school leadership and administration, important concepts, case studies, and simulations, which that's already gone through at least 4-5 different editions. It's a very well cited, very used textbook that in our field is extremely important. On another note, our field in the UCA world, in 2018, she was one of 5 scholars that was named as a hidden figure. And so it was a special award that we gave in Houston, again, to commemorate the African-American women who led in NASA in the early days of NASA. They named this award called Hidden Figures for those who are really working behind the scenes. Somebody who's always worked to mentor, again, grad students and early career scholars. And Dr. Alston was named one of our first awardees in that category. Lastly, I'd like to mention that she was just recently, appointed as the interim director for Ashland's diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And I know that it says in there that you're going to be serving in that capacity just this spring term. I'm sure they're going to try to keep you doing that. It's an important position that a lot of our universities are struggling with. Our higher educational institutions need we pull a lot from the K-12 area to come and help us think about these issues differently at higher ed. So I know that they're very lucky to have you as a leader across the university and working on these diversity issues. I can go on. I know she's a Dallas Cowboy fan, and that's good for us down here in Texas. And along with her partner, Dr. Cynthia Tyson, I know she's done a lot of great work for our scholars in the field. And so I'd like to turn the time over to Dr. Alston, and we look forward to hearing your words of wisdom. And again, thank you for joining us today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, my friend, my brother. We've known each other a long time, and just appreciate the invitation. I'm glad to be with you this evening. I really do wish that the circumstances were different and that I could be there in San Antonio, because I had already planned on having my reservations over at Bohannon's for my steak. But we'll do that at another time when the world opens up again, as we say around this house. After I got the invitation, I thought about, what can I talk about? And the Spirit does what it always does with me. It leads me to the place for the time that we will be together. And it led me to the right thing, I think, in this time. This evening's talk is grounded in the work of the great theologian Howard Thurman and his seminal work, Jesus and the Disinherited. Next slide, please. Thurman played a leading role in many social justice and in many social justice movements in the 20th century. He was one of the principal architects of modern nonviolent civil rights movement, and he was a key mentor to Dr. King. Thurman, of course, was also an author. He was an educator, a philosopher, and a mystic who grounded all of his work in the idea that life is alive with creative intelligence. So in Jesus and the Disinherited, Thurman sought to answer the question, what does the religion, I should say, of Jesus offer to those with their backs against the wall? Those whom he identified as the poor, the disinherited, and the dispossessed. And in the text, his follow-up question was, what does our religion say to them? Because, in his words, the issue is not what it counsels them to do for others whose needs may be greater, but what religion offers to meet their own needs. How are we to respond in the face of systems of dehumanization? So, what does this have to do with education and educational leadership? I think everything, absolutely everything. And trust me, I'm going somewhere with this. Many of you know I'm a preacher, so it may just be a sermon tonight. And if you feel it in the spirit to say amen or move in your place, wherever you are, feel free to do so. See, Thurman's work is asking, what is it that Christianity seems impotent to deal radically and therefore effectively with the issues of discrimination and injustice on the basis of race, religion, and national origin? That's the question that Thurman asked. Is this impotency due to a betrayal of the genius of religion, or is it due to a basic weakness in the religion itself? See, I really am going somewhere with this. Just stick with me. Let's make this personal for those of us who are in education and educational leadership, and ask the question this way. Why is it that our educational system seems impotent to deal radically and therefore effectively with issues of discrimination and injustice on the basis of race, on the basis of religion, on the basis of gender, on the basis of gender expression, on the basis of sexuality, national origin, ability, etc. And is this impotency due to a betrayal of the genius of the system, or is it due to a basic weakness in the system itself? See, Thurman argues how people who live in such predicaments, i.e., their backs up against the wall, those who are at the margins, are pursued by what he referred to as the three hounds of hell. And the three hounds of hell are fear, deception, and hatred. Now, ironically, each hound can be healed, H-E-E-L-E-D. A hound is a dog and it can heal, right? Each hound can be healed and used as a tool for surviving personal and systemic oppression. According to an article in a 2020 article in Christianity Today, Christian Collins Wynn noted some things about Thurman and this idea of these three hounds. In it, he notes that Thurman sees that fear can focus the mind and train the body to avoid situations and encounters which could lead to violence or death. Then he said that deception can keep the oppressor in the dark regarding an individual or community's real feelings, real motivations, real actions, and even their aspirations. And finally, hatred can steal, S-T-E-E-L, the resolve of those who find themselves facing overwhelming odds. Yet, Thurman argues allowing fear, deception, or hatred to become the ruling ethos of the dispossessed comes with a significant price. Habitually adopting any one hound of hell ultimately takes its toll on the humanity of the oppressed. Further stealing, S-T-E-A-L-I-N-G this time, from them their dignity and their ability to reimagine the world and to work for genuine social transformation. And so here it is where we find ourselves for tonight's talk: education and the disinherited, leading through fear, deception, and hatred with love. Now, if I was preaching on a Sunday, I would repeat that. And since I'm here in my basement, I'm going to repeat it anyway. Education and the disinherited, leading through fear, deception, and hatred with love. So who are the disinherited in education? They are those who are marginalized. Those who are marginalized are populations that are excluded from the mainstream social, economic, cultural, or political life. Those populations include, but by no means are limited to, groups excluded due to race, religion, politics, culture, age, gender, financial status, etc. So let's get some of the data out of the way first. And we have some stats up on the screen already. In the fall of 2020, just last September, there were about 56.4 million students who were projected to attend elementary, middle, and high schools across the US. Now, all of these stats I pulled from NCES, the National Center for Education Statistics. 50.7 million of these students are in public schools, and 55.7 million are in private schools. Now, this is going to be really interesting when we pull the data after this year and whenever we get to post-COVID to see how those numbers flip, because so many parents have moved their children from public schools to private schools during this pandemic. Now, of the 50.7 million public school students, we can break that down further into 1.5 million pre-Ks, 3.7 million kindergartners, 35.3 million were expected to do pre-K through grade 8, 15.4 million grades 9 through 12. And of those going into the 9th grade, they were looking at 4.1 million students. These were the projections for fall of 2020. Next slide. The projected 50.7 million public school students entering pre-K through 12, again in fall 2020, if we look at race and ethnicity, there are 23.4 million white students, 14 million Hispanic students, 7.6 million Black students, 2.8 million Asian students, 2.3 million students of 2 or more races, 0.5 million American Indian / Alaska Native students, and 0.2 million Pacific Islander students. Now, this means, if we look at these numbers, this means that the majority of the children in public schools are now students of color or non-white. The majority, yet and still we like to use the word minority, but the majority of these students are non-white. That's 27.3 million versus 23.4 million white students. And of that, 53% of them were female, 47% are male. And that the language that NCES does not account for those who identify as non-binary, gender non-conforming. So I'm just using the language that I just pulled straight from the statistics. If we dig deeper into these stats, we see, going back, and these statistics are from 2018, show that approximately 12.6 million children under the age of 18 were in families living in poverty. And that means nearly 20% of all school-age children were qualifying for free and reduced lunch. Again, it's going to be really interesting to see what this data looks like coming through this COVID pandemic. More recent data, again, as far as it could go back, was 2018, 2019, reports that approximately 8% of all school-age children identified as LGBTQI and about 3.2% as unsure. As we look at these statistics, many of these children, if not most of them, are those who we would call the disinherited, the dispossessed, and the marginalized. And they are crippled by these 3 hounds of hell: fear, deception, and hatred, because the system was never set up for them in the first place. Yet, many of them have, and many of them continue to not only survive in this system, but also to thrive with a testimony of how they've made it through. So let's take a look at these hounds of hell. Let's put them on trial. So I'm going to call to, we can go back to the previous slide. I'm going to call to the stand the Hound of Fear. Gregory in 2019 noted that fear and its related feelings of anxiety and despair activates our so-called reptilian brain and moves us into a reactive mode of functioning that often overrides rationale to protect the survival of an organism. Sometimes we are frozen in our fear. Sometimes that fear makes us do and say things that in a rational state of mind we would not have done. It is a powerful emotional and biological response that moves us to action. It can also be manipulated for the purposes of maintaining, listen to me now, power, scuttling the opportunity to consider empirical facts and solutions that go beyond violence. I know I'm stepping heavy here because this is recent right? These are things that are happening. So as we have lived in recent years, months, weeks, and days, we see that a culture of fear is easy to stir up in today's world. It destroys communities as we come to fear one another rather than cultivate trust and connection. And a sense of individual identity so critical to the health of and well-being of any individual. See, almost daily, we promote feelings of inferiority by the way we, individuals, groups, states, cities, communities, families, all of those, by the way we treat those who didn't, I hate this phrase, but it works here, pulls themselves up by their bootstraps. We may make people, and if we talk about this from an educational leadership lens, people, i.e. faculty, staff, students, parents, communities, feel less than because of their age, because of their looks, because of their perfection or lack thereof, because of their body shape, because of their sexual orientation or their political affiliation. How can we promote the dignity of the individual through social interaction and policy that reduces this kind of segregation? How can we teach and lead in schools under an umbrella of fear? How? Now let's call to the stand deception, also known as hypocrisy too. There's a chasm between integrity and hypocrisy, and it's huge. And this has played out again on the main stage of our lives most recently. Yet this is not new behavior. Today we see a culture of inconsistent truths, i.e. assumptions and perspectives that are stated as truth, and they are repeated over and over again firmly, and anything that's contrary to the argument or perspective is summarily dismissed. And that is at the expense of reality, it's at the expense of science, and it is at the expense of fairness and equity. We see this played out in our educational system, particularly around curriculum. What gets taught, what doesn't get taught, and what people are allowed, I should say parents, are allowed to opt out of. Historically, this type of hypocrisy can be changed, but it takes a mobilization of resources, especially within the ranks of those who are disinherited from those revised truths. See, it takes those who are in the margins to do some of the work too, which gets very tiring because we get tired of having to do our own work and your own work. The change is often slow and loss is real. But we have to deal with how deception is packaged and gifted to us these days. Come here, hatred. Come on to the stand. We got to say a few words to you too. This aspect of human behavior is as old as humans and as long as humans have walked this earth. We all know how hatred has led to the destruction of people, to the destruction of places, to the destruction of beauty. And hatred is long lasting, and it passes from generation to generation. That's what we're looking at now with what's going on in our streets and in our capital. Again, we see this played out on our current real life U.S., United States of America stage. This is not a rehearsal. This is not a reality show. This is life. hate has become the order of the day. And sadly, hatred has become more entrenched with each successive generation exposed to violence and destruction and lies that are now believed to be truth. Additionally, our current lives in the midst of COVID, there's not a time that I can talk about leadership or anything without mentioning COVID. But our lives in the midst of COVID makes many feel less included, more isolated, more alienated, and impersonal because we are socially distancing. We are physically distancing. Thurman in this text points out that as a lack of authentic human interaction, as that interaction lessens, seeds of hatred are sown. Hatred of self, hatred of others, hatred of things, hatred of places. Even the most resilient individuals can give into bitterness with too many setbacks in the world, too many setbacks in their lives. Not being afforded basic human rights that provide certain protection and privileges demoralizes and robs the identity of individuals and a sense of opportunity for many. Unfortunately, we have reaped and we are reaping the harvest of what has been sowed through those seeds of fear, the seed of deception and hatred, not only in our pre-K-12 systems, but also in our post-secondary systems, and dare I say, in our graduate level and professional training programs. So what do we do about this? How do we deal with these hounds of hell? Well, I'm glad you asked. Because the title says, leading through fear, deception, and hatred with love. See, we can get through it. You can go through, because we're always going through. We either going through, coming out of, or getting ready to go through again. That's just life. That's the circle of life, right? But to get through these hounds, we have to do it with love. We have to do that in the face of systems of dehumanization. The work of Mayo noted that through an exploration of the ministry of Jesus, Thurman identified love as the key to maintaining our common humanity in the midst of human atrocity. I'll say that again. Love is the key to maintaining our common humanity in the midst of human atrocity. For historical context, Jesus and the Disinherited was originally published in 1945. And so in a historical moment when resistance and retaliation would seem a suitable response to the lynchings of the time and the terror that was characterized so much of the life in the segregated South. But the South wasn't unique. It was going on everywhere. Thurman's response is in Jesus and the Disinherited. And so his response, this is his response to suffering that protects against the destruction of one's soul. Thurman challenged those, quote, who stand at a moment in human history with their backs against the wall, to maintain courage, to maintain integrity and dignity in the face of atrocities, rather than resorting to fear, deception, and hatred. Difficult to do. All too often, he noted, or he argued, that these techniques have been used by the poor, by the dispossessed, and the disinherited to protect themselves against the strong. And while these might seem like appropriate responses to atrocities, the tragic consequence, he argued, is one of moral degradation. See, Thurman's text is a battle cry for those whose lives have had little value to fight, not for revenge, but to wrest their souls from the stranglehold of inequity. It's a battle cry. Thurman argued that the life of a man, woman, at the time he wrote, he was man, but the life of humans in their spirit is what he referred to as the inward center. It's what I talk about in the work that I do about the soul work of leadership, SOUL work of leadership, spirituality, leading from that center, pivoting from my space of centeredness. It is there that his thoughts and motives are formed. It is from the heart of man that actions flow. It is from the heart that the mouth speaks. As such, it is in the spiritual realm that the real battle for freedom must be fought. So this is the space in educational leadership where I believe that Thurman's framework here in Jesus and the Disinherited can be a guidepost to make us better in the academy as professors, to help us to design and implement better programs that will ultimately produce better leaders that we need to make the change in the system to truly educate the masses. As I've said on many occasions, a lot of times in the classes that I teach, this is the space for the ethic of care, the ethic of justice, and the ethic of responsibility to come together for those of us who are in leadership positions, those of us who train leaders, those who do leadership. Too many programs, too many leadership preparation programs are still teaching leadership from this old cold management perspective, the old stuff. Yeah, we've grown from that. So we build upon that to see what is new. We are human beings, thus we are relational beings. And relationships on the basic level of humanity are about love. Leadership is, at its core, love. Love is central to leadership as an emotion and as a behavior. It is accepting and it creates space for the other. It is accepting and it creates space for the disenfranchised. It is accepting and it creates space for the marginalized. It is accepting and it creates space for the dispossessed. It is accepting and it creates space for the disinherited. Again, I go back to this wasn't created for many of us in the first place. So there wasn't an inheritance that was set up for us. We were disinherited from the get-go. And the truth of the matter is that the opposite of love is not hate, but indifference. And indifference is the result of fear, deception, and hate. See, fear is debilitating. And on the other side, there is confidence, courage, and hope, which are all love. Courage, as Bryant said in the book Love Leadership, said that courage is nothing more than an act of faith, of reaching through fear. See, there we go with that preposition again, through. Y'all, I'm an old English teacher. Through, we're going through. worry, pride, self-recrimination, fear. Fear drives the ego, but love drives life. In fact, love drives all that matters in life, truth be told. So if that is the real truth, what are our driving forces in educational leadership and leadership preparation programs? What? Are we still on the driving forces of the GE studies? Are we still on the driving forces of the work that was done in 1978? Or where are we? What are the driving forces of educational leadership and leadership preparation so that we are preparing the leaders that we need to go out in these schools to prepare more leaders? I believe it was Nikki Giovanni who said, the goal of leadership is to develop more leaders. It's not to sit and put under a basket and say, this is mine. From the work of the Center for Compassionate Leadership, they share this. They say that one aspect of love that is central to the effectiveness of leaders is having love for themselves. See, this thing gets personal. There's the personal and there's the professional. But you take the personal into your professional every day. So I often say this when I'm preaching in church, that the hardest thing, the commandment says, love God first and then love your neighbor as yourself. That's the second one. The problem is people don't love themselves. They don't know how to love themselves. So this is why this is hard work. If our aspiration is to care for others as much as we care for ourselves, then we must take care of and love ourselves first. You got to learn how to do that. You got to know yourself. As a leader, you must know yourself. The initial step toward leading with love is to operate from a strong foundation of self-compassion and love. And there are a lot of ways to work and engage in healthy self-love and compassion. And I think here, the work on mindfulness in leadership is salient and a needed addition in our preparation programs. It's not some frou-frou stuff on the side. No, this is some serious work that we have to do personally. When we practice love and compassion in the workplace, what happens? Well, the research says these things happen. When we practice love and compassion in the workplace, the research says that teams produce more. The research says that employee satisfaction rises. The research says that employee turnover declines. The research says that teams operate more creatively. When people, students, faculty, staff, parents, community are worried about their safety and security, they are distracted and operate from that place of fear. That's what our natural thing is to do. However, when people feel seen, heard, and respected, they flourish individually. And then they contribute wholeheartedly to an organization. They contribute wholeheartedly to society. They contribute wholeheartedly to their families. And ultimately, they contribute wholeheartedly to themselves, i.e., they love themselves. In the book that I referenced earlier, John Hope Bryant, the book is called Love Leadership, as you see here on the slide, Love Leadership, the New Way to Lead in a Fear-Based World. He wrote down a listing of what the clash of cultures looks like between love and fear. So he what love was to him, he just kind of wrote those ideas down, and then what fear was, then he listed those. And it was like an aha moment for him. In using this, he said he recognized something about love and leadership that I think speaks volumes for us in educational leadership. And he said it like this, and I quote, "Love leadership recognizes you will never go bad doing good, and you'll never be wrong doing right." Love leadership recognizes that you will never go bad doing good, and you'll never be wrong doing right. And I'll quote myself here, a chapter that I wrote some years ago on leadership as soul work. And I used the frame, it was the first time that I used the framework of John Coltrane's A Love Supreme. Many of you know that is my all-time favorite album. And it speaks to me differently every time I listen to it. But using that lens of Coltrane's A Love Supreme and thinking about leadership as soul work, I said these words: the problems of the underserved and marginalized will merely be perpetuated by a new generation of educational leaders operating from an old, mended, positivistic knowledge base. Real world problems do not present themselves as problems, but rather as messy, indeterminate situations. Once educational leaders and other educators, those in pre-K through post-secondary, are ready to redefine the institution of schooling, then they will be able to work on alleviating the long-standing problems faced by marginalized students, the long-standing problems faced by the disinherited. And they need a true justice and love orientation to mitigate these situations. See, the zeitgeist of leadership training, preparation, research, and practice is still, in far too many ways, hard, directive, and frankly positioned in the hounds of hell. They're positioned in fear, deception, and hatred. But we do have a changing landscape and an opportunity, in the words of the late Senator John Lewis, to make good trouble in our field, to challenge the status quo, to speak truth to power, and to really make a difference in the lives of those who sit on and outside of the margins, but also for those who sit smack dab in the middle. See, in Jesus and the Disinherited, Thurman insists that to fight and struggle against oppressive powers and principalities requires a spiritual reservoir that can only be filled by and through a practice of spiritual disciplines. What are the spiritual disciplines that we need to teach and practice in educational leadership preparation and training so that we can send out leaders who operate from a place of love to embrace those who feel disinherited in our educational system? I am dedicated to making sure that those who follow me will be educated, cared for, treated fairly, and loved enough so that they learn it to pass that on. See, leading with love helps to overcome fear, deception, and hate. So I leave you with these final 7 words. Lead with your heart. Lead with love. Thank you. Now I'll answer any questions if I can.
Thank you so much. Wow. I think a lot of us needed to hear that right now. I really appreciate those words. You did take us to church, and I think what you're hitting on is what I've been talking a lot with our students. We have educational leadership students on this call. We have some master students in teaching, Master of Arts in Teaching students that are in the classroom right now and are headed out to be first-time educators. And a lot of what we've been talking about is just how exhausted, in a lot of ways, demoralized, dehumanized, some of the issues that people are feeling.
Yeah.
And I hear a lot of, in a lot of ways, the advocacy that's happening across our schools here in San Antonio and in Bexar County. So your words about leading with love, your words about humanizing these issues, and I love the fact that you're using a text that was written in 1945, because it historicizes the arguments that Dr. Thurman was making, the rhetoric that he was having to deal with, and the actions that he and his colleagues were having to deal with during those time periods. There's a straight line to what we're dealing with today, from everywhere from Washington, D.C. to our state capitals to our communities. And so I really thank you for contextualizing that for us.
Yeah. It's everything old is new again, right? There's nothing new under the sun. And so you have to be able to find your grounding. You've got to be able to historicize, and find those works that speak to this time. It's there. Shame on us for not reaching back to have that Sankofa moment, to reach back, to grab that thing that's needed for this present moment. I struggled with, where I was going to go with the talk. And then I was sitting down here in the office and I looked up on the shelf and the book was sitting right there. And I said, that's it. Because that's what we're living right now. And even those of us who are privileged to have these doctorates, privileged to work in the academy, privileged to be in, particular income brackets, et cetera, are still the disinherited. At the end of the day, we're still the disinherited. So, yeah,
I think that, a lot of what we talk about is the how part. Like, how do you educate? How do you lead in this current context? And I think, like you said, a lot of what our ancestors have done before us, it's not like recreating the wheel. I mean, they showed us the way. They wrote about it. They led the way, and we're living through. I mean, we're experiencing or celebrating Black History Month right now, and I think that's just a perfect time for us to kind of consider the leaders that have come before us and learning from that and applying it today. And going back to this issue of, this has always been part of who we are, the broader U.S. society, the fear, the hate, the deception. And if it's not going to be within our educational institutions of leading from a place of love, and if it's not going to be within our educational institutions of really humanizing the people that we work with and the issues that we address, where is it going to happen? So it's really incumbent, it's required of us to do that within educational leadership. If it's not us, then who? When we work with young people and families all the time.
Exactly. And it is this this idea. I will often quote Audre Lorde in the the Master's Tools. But what I've in further research, the tools that the master used weren't their tools in the first place. Those were our ancestors' tools that were stolen. So can I use the master's tools to dismantle? I sure can, because they belong to me in the first place. And those tools, for me, are deeply rooted in love. Love, family, relationship. And so, yes, I can take those tools and do a great job of dismantling this thing that we've been dealing with as our system of public education forever. I always ask the question about public education. Why is it still the same? Why are we still schooling like everybody works on a farm? Right? Why are we doing it on an agrarian calendar? Because, right? So, yeah.
We have a question here from Stanley Johnson. He mentions, thank you, Dr. Alston, for speaking about hatred in the context of leadership and its role in fostering disenfranchisement. My question is, given that capitalism requires inequity and racism ensures it, Can you speak to how intergenerational hatred is learned via capitalism and how it further perpetuates systems of oppression?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Johnson, for that question. We don't, these are the conversations that we, particularly, I'll talk about myself. I won't say all Black people. I'll say the Black people at my house growing up. These are the conversations we're not supposed to have outside of the home. We don't want to talk about how intergenerational hatred is learned and perpetuated. We don't want to talk about certain things. And when you don't talk about things, then they are replicated. They will not go away because we didn't learn to sit down as a family and say, you know what, this is what I'm really feeling. This is what's happening. Let's see how we can work through this. No, we hush those things up. And I think that occurs a lot for those of us who are on the margins in our various familial cultures, that we don't deal with it. If we don't deal with it at this level, then of course it's going to be perpetuated. And then when we look at it on the outside and how the world functions, because the world is giving us this truth that I talked about, this so-called truth, and people are eating it up as the truth because they keep repeating it. Therefore, it becomes our way of being. So that further perpetuates the systems of oppression, because many of us who've been oppressed have bought into it and don't see how we can make our way out of it. And so what it takes is key people, not necessarily somebody who's in a leadership position, but somebody who's willing enough to speak up and say, hey, wait a minute, no. And you've got to have that kind of critical mass here and there to say, no, this is this is who we are. This is really where we come from. No, that is not truth. Mm-hmm. Right? It's sort of like there's a documentary, and I can't think of the name of it, but there's this documentary about racism, and there was I think it was a Black man who had gone undercover in the Klan or something. And anyway, he was talking about music, and he was talking about I don't know if it was Little Richard or somebody else, but he was saying that he was talking to the white guy, saying, yeah, this music is, this is the creator of this music. And the white guy was like, yeah, no, Elvis learned it from Elvis taught them, not the opposite, because that's the truth that has been told. And that's the truth that people have bought into and continue to believe that, rather than to say, oh, somebody other than a person of my hue did this. And so that's how we end up with this. And it's hard to break that intergenerational hatred. And to break the hatred, only love can do that.
And you got to go through it.
You got to go through it. You got to go through it. I said it. You either going through, coming out, or getting ready to go through again. Because that's how life is. You have the days where everything is good. I'm good. Nothing's happening. All is well. And then something punches you and you're in a deep depression. And so you're down. But you can't stay down. You got to go through so that you can come out on the other side. And in the language of the church, you come out on the other side so that you have this testimony, so that you can then tell other people. That testimony is the testimony of love that teaches others, that helps others, so that we can then begin to address this perpetuation of oppression.
Absolutely. We're up against time. There's one more question I'm going to get to real quick, and you can answer it if you want. But I think that Stephen Drake is asking, thank you deeply for your wisdom, Dr. Alston. I've done some work with the LGBTQIA plus topic of inclusion and issues in education. And one of my questions is, how do we lead with love and compassion when we run into those who hold actual leadership positions, refuse to lead with love? How do we overcome that necessarily back against the wall moment, but that indifferent brick wall in your path moment?
Yeah, that might be a dissertation right there.
Yeah.
I think a part of that is the personal resolve that you have as an individual. So knowing self, going back to that, working on self, loving self, and building one's inner strength. And the other thing is knowing when to fight the battle. You know, I've often said, Dr. Linda Sue Warner taught me this at Penn State. Is this the hill on which I wish to die? Mm-hmm. No, it is not. Sometimes
being strategic.
Absolutely. So sometimes it's not going to be that person that you're not going to change them. The only thing you can change, or only person you can change, is yourself. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it means that you're going to have to back up and think of another strategy to go around, go under, go over, find somebody else that's key to connect with you. Partnership is really important here. Mm-hmm. So that you can overcome. Mm-hmm. But then also recognize that sometimes you're not going to. And that's okay. Because what you do is that you learn the lesson from it, mm-hmm. and you live to fight another day. Mm-hmm. And something else will come along, and you have begun to build the strength so that the next time, mm-hmm. you can do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think if anything's taught us through the Black community struggle, right, and understanding that this is not something that happens overnight. It's been a consistent struggle, and it's a dynamic process of the issues that have been dealt with for many generations are still being dealt with, and they're going to be there for the next generation.
Absolutely.
But your point about what kinds of leaders are we developing, what types of preparation programs are really essential, is really going to make me think, about the kinds of work that we want to do, and it's incumbent on our university. I know our provost was on here, Dr. Denise Jones, made a comment. Yeah, she's a long-term friend of yours, and her leadership at the university's level and having really the kinds of conversations that we need right now and we have needed. That's not easy work. It's not work that's done alone. It's forward-thinking work. It's loving work. That I think it's a model of what we need to do as a university and in higher ed.
It's also work that it's not necessarily going to pay you well, right? But it's about, and I say this is me, really. You know me. It's knowing my purpose, mm-hmm. knowing my purpose, knowing me, knowing my purpose, in order to make it better for the next. I'm going to be okay. Mm-hmm. We're going to be all right. As the song say, right? Mm-hmm. I'm going to be all right. I want to make sure that the next coming is going to be okay. Mm-hmm. And I have to model life, love, and leadership in such a way that they get it and that they take that mantle on themselves. And it becomes a part of who they are, mm-hmm. so that the next generation after them. See, this is it. We talk about the disinherited. Yeah, I'm not trying to leave an inheritance, because you can spend an inheritance real quick. Mm-hmm. It's about leaving a legacy, mm-hmm. of love in leadership. Mm-hmm. So what will our legacies be on the other side?
I can't top that. Dr. Alston, it's been such a, as Dr. Jones said, the boost in the arm that we needed. And, during these times when we haven't been able to see each other in several months and be in the same space, I really do appreciate you sharing with us tonight. And I know our classes are going to talk about this over the next couple of weeks. And I really appreciate you doing that for us. And hopefully we see each other soon, bring you down. And all the health and happiness and peace for you and your family.
Thank you so much. I miss you. I miss our times together. But thank you for the invitation. I've enjoyed this.
Thanks so much. We're gonna